My name is Margaret Lawson, and everything changed the second my ex-husband's lawyer pushed a thick folder across my kitchen table and calmly said the painting was valued at $3. 1 million. Before I could even process that number, my 17-year-old stepson leaned in close to me and whispered, steady as could be, "Let me handle it." I remember thinking there was no way. In my head, he was still just a kid. The folder hit the table with a heavy, dull thump. It was the same scarred oak table my father bought secondhand back in 1989, the one that had seen everything. Ethan had done his homework there. I paid bills there. I'd sat there late at night after long shifts, crying quietly so no one would hear. The lawyer's hand rested on the folder, pale and perfectly manicured, not shaking at all. Behind him, my old coffee maker rattled and hissed as it finished brewing a pot that suddenly felt pointless. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Lawson," he said, "my client is prepared to pursue his legal rights as the biological father." Across from me sat Richard Lawson, straight-backed and relaxed, smelling faintly of expensive cologne. He hadn't changed much over the years. Still handsome in that clean, polished way. Still very good at acting like nothing had ever gone wrong. It had been 12 years since I'd last seen him. I glanced at Ethan. He wouldn't look at anyone. His fingers tapped lightly against his thigh. 1, 2, 3, 4. A habit. His way of staying calm when everything felt too loud. But his eyes never left the folder. They were sharp, focused. $3.1 million, the lawyer repeated, like maybe I hadn't heard him the first time. The painting sold last month in Chicago. Richard smiled. Not at me, at the room. Like the decision had already been made. Like this was over. I should have screamed. I should have hurled my coffee mug against the wall. Instead, all I felt was exhaustion. The kind that settles deep in your bones. I turned to my own attorney beside me and said quietly, "Let him take it." Richard's smile spread wider. That was when Ethan leaned toward me again. His voice low and even. "Margaret," he said, "let me handle it." The room went dead silent. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. Richard let out a short, amused laugh. "This is a conversation between adults," Richard said. "He doesn't even." Ethan stood up. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just enough to make sure everyone saw him. "My name is Ethan Lawson," he said, his voice steady. "And I'd like to hear the claim again slowly." Something shifted right then. I felt it in my chest. But none of this really started in my kitchen. It started 12 years earlier in Toledo, Ohio, on the night Richard packed a single suitcase and told me he was leaving. He said he needed a different life. Said he couldn't handle all of this anymore. He didn't look at Ethan when he said it. Ethan was 5 at the time, sitting on the living room floor, lining up his toy cars by color. I asked Richard about child support, about visits, about responsibility. "I'll have my lawyer handle it," he said, and then he walked out the door. He never came back. From that point on, I raised Ethan alone. Eventually, we moved to Cedar Falls, Iowa, someplace cheaper, someplace where no one knew our history. I worked mornings at a diner and nights at a grocery store. School was hard for Ethan. The noise bothered him. The lights. The chaos. At night, when the house finally went quiet, he painted. First it was just colors and shapes. Then scenes began to form. A kitchen table glowing under warm light. A woman's hands folded in prayer. Cornfields at dusk. Things that felt familiar. Things that felt safe. Some weeks I bought paint instead of groceries. I ate cereal for dinner and told myself it wouldn't always be like this. That it was temporary. That it was worth it. When Ethan turned 15, a local art teacher insisted we get legal advice. She said talent like his needed protection. We met with a small-town attorney who helped us set up a custodial account. Everything was done carefully by the book. Transparent. Responsible. No one imagined it would ever matter this much. When a gallery in Chicago called, I assumed it was a scam. When the painting sold, I locked myself in the bathroom at work and cried. Not because of the money, but because someone finally saw what Ethan had been trying to say all these years. That was when Richard resurfaced. He found us through a local newspaper article, hired a lawyer out of Des Moines, and filed a claim as Ethan's father. Now he was sitting in my kitchen like he'd never left at all. The lawyer adjusted his tie. "We'll proceed through mediation first," he said. But my client is confident. Richard finally looked at Ethan. Son, he said, this doesn't have to get ugly. Ethan didn't answer right away. His fingers stopped tapping. He took a breath. You weren't there, Ethan said. So you don't get to decide that. Richard scoffed. Blood is blood. Ethan tilted his head slightly. Contracts are contracts. My heart started pounding. The lawyer frowned. Excuse me? Ethan reached into his backpack and pulled out a thin, worn notebook, the cover marked with dates. I kept records, he said. Emails. Court notices. Payment histories. Richard's smile disappeared. The lawyer stood. This meeting is over. As they headed for the door, Richard turned back. This isn't finished, he said. Ethan watched him leave, calm and focused. I dropped heavily into my chair. Ethan, I whispered. What are you doing? He finally looked at me, really looked at me. I'm finishing something, he said. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. The coffee maker clicked off. The house settled into silence. And for the first time in 12 years, I understood something clearly. Richard had underestimated the wrong person. People hear the number first and assume this story begins with money. Doesn't. It begins with absence. Richard left on a Tuesday night in March. I remember because trash pickup was Wednesday, and his suitcase banged against the bin as he dragged it down the driveway. He said he was heading to Florida. Said the warm weather helped him think. I stood in the doorway holding a 5-year-old who hated being touched when he felt overwhelmed, but clung to me anyway. Dad's going on a trip, I told Ethan. Richard didn't correct me. By Friday, his phone had been disconnected. We stayed in Toledo for another year. Mostly because moving costs money when you don't have any. Ethan started kindergarten, and every morning felt like a negotiation. The noise, the lights, the shouting kids. He'd rock back and forth on the couch, pressing his palms together, whispering numbers under his breath. One morning after a meltdown so bad the neighbors knocked to check on us, I called Richard and left a message asking for help. 2 days later he emailed back. This isn't my problem anymore. I saved that email. I didn't know why at the time. I just did. Cedar Falls came next. Iowa wasn't romantic, but it was affordable. We landed in a 2-bedroom rental with a porch that groaned when you stepped on it, and a kitchen that always smelled like old pine cleaner. No matter how much I scrubbed. I found a job at the diner on Main Street. Early mornings. Endless coffee refills. Men grumbling about the weather and women leaving tips and loose change. Ethan didn't talk much back then, not in full sentences anyway. But he listened. He watched. He picked up on patterns most people missed. He lined his cereal up by color before he'd eat it. If I bought a different brand, he'd shut down for hours. Money was always a problem. Some nights I ate toast so Ethan could have chicken. Some weeks I stood in the grocery aisle deciding whether gas or paint mattered more. The painting started by accident. One winter evening, the power flickered out during a storm. Ethan dragged an old cardboard box from the closet. Inside were dried-up school paints someone had donated months earlier. The paint was cracked and stiff, barely usable. He added water, stirred slowly, and sat at the table under a lantern, painting until midnight. What he made wasn't really a picture. It was a feeling. A kitchen table. Hands folded. Light landing just right. I stared at it so long my eyes burned. From that night on, painting became his language. When school overwhelmed him, he painted. When he couldn't explain why something hurt, he painted. Over time, I learned to read color the way other mothers read facial expressions. There were bad years. Years when the car refused to start. Years when Ethan screamed because the tag in his shirt scratched his neck. Once, when he was 10, he had a sensory meltdown so severe we ended up in the fluorescent lights buzzing, monitors beeping. Called Richard again. Left 3 messages. He never replied. The bill arrived 2 weeks later. I cried in the laundry room so Ethan wouldn't hear me. That winter we ate cereal for dinner more times than I like to admit. I tried to make it sound fun. Ethan just nodded and said, "We're saving." Like it was obvious. I swallowed the shame and agreed. By middle school, Ethan started keeping notebooks. Dates. Times. Events. No emotions, just facts. When the school called. When the landlord fixed the heater. When I worked double shifts. When Richard didn't show up to court hearings he'd been notified about. I never asked him to do that. He just did. When Ethan was 15, his art teacher, Mrs. Clean, pulled me aside after a local show. "You need to protect him," she said. She didn't mean physically. She meant legally. That's how we ended up meeting a lawyer named Tom Bradley. Local guy. Gray hair. Cheap suit. He spoke slowly and explained everything twice. He helped us set up a custodial account and a trust, just in case money ever came. I remember laughing nervously when he said that. Money never came to us. Not like that. Until Chicago. The gallery smelled like wine and money. Ethan wore his noise-canceling headphones and stayed close to me. When the bidding started, I didn't really understand what was happening. Numbers flew. Heads nodded. Then the hammer fell. $3.1 million. Ethan squeezed my hand once hard, then let go. The article came out a week later. Local Iowa teen artist breaks records. There was a photo of Ethan standing stiffly, hands folded. Richard must have recognized the nose. The eyes. That's when the letters started arriving. Later, sitting alone in my kitchen after they'd left, I stared at the door long after it closed. "You don't have to do this," I told Ethan. "We can settle. We can be done." Ethan shook his head. "He didn't forget us," he said. "He ignored us. There's a difference." That's when it hit me. While I'd been surviving all those years, Ethan had been preparing. And for the first time since Richard left, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger. Not fear. Just clarity. Chicago felt too loud the second time. The gallery sat just off Michigan Avenue. All glass and polished stone. The kind of place where people whispered even when they were excited. The floors reflected light like water. Every footstep echoing. Ethan pressed his headphones tighter over his ears, jaw set, eyes scanning for exits the way he always did in unfamiliar places. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded once. That meant not really, but manageable. The painting hung alone on a white wall lit from above. Evenings at home. No faces. Just a kitchen table, 2 chairs, and a single lamp casting a warm circle of light. The kind of scene most people walk past unless they've lived it. A man in a dark blazer stood nearby with his arms crossed. "It feels honest," he said to no one in particular. "Like endurance." Ethan didn't respond. He never did. When strangers talked about his work instead of to him, he stared at the floor, fingers tapping lightly against his thigh. 1, 2, 3, 4. Grounding himself. The sale was already done. This visit was for paperwork and press photos. I hated every second of it. One reporter asked how it felt to raise a gifted child alone. I gave a polite answer and changed the subject. Another asked where Ethan's father was. "Not involved," I said. Flat. Final. The article ran anyway. Midwest paper. Small circulation. Big enough. 3 days later Tom Bradley called. "Maggie," he said, "your ex-husband has retained counsel." I wasn't surprised. I was just tired. The first mediation was scheduled the following week in Des Moines. Neutral office. Beige walls. Coffee that tasted burnt. Richard arrived early, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. His lawyer, a younger man with sharp shoes and sharper smiles, did most of the talking. "Blood is blood," the lawyer said, spreading his hands. "Mr. Lawson has rights." Ethan sat beside me, shoulders tight. The room hummed, lights buzzing, vents rattling. Too much. His knee bounced faster. I leaned in close. "Breathe," I whispered. He did. The lawyer slid a document across the table. "We're seeking a fair portion of the proceeds." I watched Richard's face, expectant, confident. "That money isn't mine," I said. "It never was." The lawyer blinked. "Excuse me?" "It belongs to Ethan," I said. "Through a custodial trust established 2 years ago." Richard laughed. "You can't just hide money." Tom Bradley cleared his throat. "It isn't hidden. It's documented." Ethan lifted his head. "Page 3, he said quietly. Everyone turned. "The trust," Ethan continued, voice steady, "was established when I was 15. It's irrevocable without court approval. The funds are restricted." The lawyer frowned, flipping pages. "You rehearsed this." Ethan shook his head. I reviewed it. Richard's smile tightened. The mediator suggested we take a break. The moment we stepped into the hallway, Ethan clapped his hands over his ears and started breathing too fast. Too much, he whispered. We moved to a quiet corner near the stairwell. I rubbed slow circles on his back and counted breaths with him. In, out, in, out. His eyes stayed closed. I can do this, he said finally. Just not all at once. When we went back inside, Richard leaned forward, lowering his voice like that made him reasonable. Son, he said, this doesn't have to be ugly. Ethan looked at him, really looked at him. You left, he said. That isn't ugly. That's a fact. The room froze. After the meeting, Tom pulled me aside. He's sharp, he said quietly. But your ex's lawyer is going to dig. I know, I told him. That night in the hotel, Ethan sat on the bed with his notebook open. The pages were packed: dates, court notices, printouts, email headers. What are you looking for? I asked. Patterns, he said. And gaps. He showed me an email chain from years back. One where Richard declined visitation. Another where he refused to attend a school meeting. Then one I'd never seen before, forwarded by a court clerk, about unpaid child support and a missed hearing. They sent notices, Ethan said. He didn't show up. My chest tightened. You kept all of this? Yes. I thought about the nights I cried in the laundry room. The mornings I smiled anyway. The way Ethan had watched everything, quietly storing it away. Money changes people, I said, mostly to myself. Ethan looked up. It reveals them. Outside, traffic hummed. Sirens wailed somewhere far off. A city that didn't know us and didn't need to. But Richard knew now, and he was about to learn something else. I told Tom Bradley I was willing to cooperate. The words felt wrong coming out of my mouth, but I said them anyway. Tom looked at me over his glasses, surprised. Maybe disappointed. You're sure? I'm tired, I said. And that part was true. If giving him a piece ends this faster, then fine. Word spread quickly. Richard's lawyer called the next morning, suddenly pleasant. He talked timelines, floated numbers, spoke like we were already halfway to a deal. That night, Richard left a voicemail. Maggie, he said softly, almost kindly, I'm glad you're being reasonable. I deleted it without responding. Inside, everything twisted. Every instinct I had as a mother screamed not to back down. But something older, quieter told me to wait. To let him believe he was winning. Ethan didn't say much at first. He just watched me closely, the way he always did when something shifted. That night, the rain wouldn't stop. It tapped against the kitchen window in uneven bursts, like impatient fingers. I sat at the table with old folders spread out everywhere. Tax returns, school letters, medical bills I'd never fully paid off. I might be making a mistake, I said out loud. Ethan stood in the doorway, rocking slightly on his heels. Maybe, he said. Then he paused. But mistakes leave records too. He stepped closer and pointed at the folders. We need everything. Especially the things you don't like looking at. I laughed once, sharp and bitter. There's a lot of those. We worked late. The fridge hummed. The clock ticked loud enough to get on my nerves. Ethan sorted papers into neat stacks, labeling each one in his careful handwriting. Dates mattered to him. Order mattered. Proof mattered. At one point, his breathing changed shorter, faster. His fingers started tapping hard against the table. I knew the signs. Too much. I asked. He nodded. We stopped. Sat quietly for a minute. I counted breaths with him until his shoulders finally relaxed. I can keep going, he said. No, I said firmly. You can rest. He didn't argue. The next day, I met my friend Carol for coffee. She'd known me since the diner days. She listened without interrupting while I told her about the mediation and my decision to cooperate. You're letting him win, she said gently. I stared into my cup. I know what it looks like. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Just don't forget who you are. That night, doubt crept in. Real doubt, the kind that keeps you staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision you've ever made. I thought about calling Richard. About offering a settlement just to be done. About choosing peace over pride. At 2 a.m, I sat alone in the kitchen. The rain was still tapping the glass. The old coffee maker clicked on out of habit. I didn't even drink it. I opened Ethan's notebook. Inside were lists, annotated emails, notes pulled from court websites. One page was highlighted. Notice of default child support hearing. Defendant failed to appear. My hands shook. You kept this, I whispered. I remembered it, Ethan said from behind me. I hadn't heard him come in. They sent it when I was 8. I closed my eyes. I could see it now, the envelope, the fear, how I shoved it into a drawer because I didn't have the energy to deal with it. I thought it didn't matter anymore, I said. Ethan's voice stayed calm. It matters because he wants credit for something he didn't do. The next mediation was tense. Richard's lawyer pushed harder, sensing weakness. He tossed around phrases like parental entitlement and fairness. Richard nodded along, smug again. Then Tom slid a document across the table. Before we discuss numbers, he said, we need to address outstanding obligations. The lawyer frowned. What obligations? Ethan leaned forward. Child support, he said. And abandonment. Richard laughed. That's ancient history. Ethan met his eyes. History is still evidence. Richard's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the mediator raised a hand. Ethan's leg bounced under the table. I reached down and squeezed his knee. He took a breath and continued. There were multiple notices, he said. He failed to appear. There's a record with the state. The room shifted. Not victory but doubt. Richard's lawyer asked for time to review the documents. The meeting ended early. Outside, Ethan let out a long breath like he'd been holding it all day. You okay? I asked. Yes, he said. Then after a pause. Tired. So was I. But beneath the exhaustion was something else. A steadiness. A quiet understanding that giving in had never been surrender. It had been strategy. Richard thought I was weak because I stayed quiet. He had no idea how much strength silence can hold. The courthouse in Black Hawk County smelled like paper and old coffee. That was the first thing I noticed as I sat on the hard wooden bench outside Courtroom B, gripping my purse tighter than I meant to. The clock above the door ticked too loudly, each second stretching longer than it should have. Every sound felt magnified. The scrape of shoes, a cough down the hall, voices leaking through thick doors and low murmurs. Ethan sat beside me, back straight, hands folded neatly in his lap. He wore the same gray sweater he always chose when he needed to feel steady. His foot tapped once then stopped. He took a slow, careful breath. You don't have to speak if you don't want to, I whispered. I want to, he said. Just not fast. Inside the courtroom, Richard paced. The smugness was gone now, replaced by irritation. His lawyer spoke to him in short, sharp bursts, pointing at a legal pad. When Richard glanced our way, his eyes passed over Ethan and landed on me. This time there was no smile. We were called in. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Beige walls. An American flag tucked into the corner. A handful of people seated behind us. Local reporters, a few curious faces. The judge, a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a calm, steady voice, took her seat and scanned the room. This court is here to determine the validity of the petitioner's claim, she said evenly. Proceed. Richard's lawyer went first. He stood tall, confidence back in place, talking about biology, about rights, about fairness. He admitted Richard had made mistakes but insisted he was still a father. He spoke about opportunity, about how money created chances that should be shared. Richard nodded along, hands folded like he belonged there. When it was our turn, Tom stood. But before he could speak, Ethan lifted his hand slightly. The judge looked surprised, then thoughtful. Your Honor, Ethan said. I'd like to speak. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Richard's lawyer shifted in his chair. Your Honor. The judge raised her hand. I'll allow it. Ethan stood. His hand shook at first. I could see it. I could feel it too, like electricity passing between us. I wanted to reach for him, steady him, but I didn't. I trusted him. My name is Ethan Lawson, he said. I'm 17. I'm the artist. A murmur moved through the room. I was 5 when my father left, Ethan continued. I didn't see him again. Not at school. Not at the hospital. Not in court. Richard stared straight ahead. Ethan opened his folder, pages clipped neatly together. These are notices sent to my father about child support hearings. He didn't attend. These are emails declining visitation. And this," he lifted the last page, "is an email sent when I was admitted to the emergency room." Tom read it aloud. Richard's words echoed in the quiet courtroom. Cold, dismissive, unmistakable. "This isn't my problem anymore." Someone in the gallery gasped. Then silence. Richard's lawyer stood abruptly. "Objection." "Sit down," the judge said calmly. "I'm listening." Ethan paused. His breathing picked up. The lights were bright, too bright. I watched him press his fingers together under the table, grounding himself. I stood and placed a light hand on his back. He nodded and kept going. "The trust was created legally," he said. "The money belongs to me, for my care and my future." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Lawson," she said to Richard, "did you contest these notices at the time?" Richard opened his mouth, closed it. "No," he said at last. The judge nodded once. "Then your claim is denied." The words rang out like a bell. Richard's face went pale. His lawyer gathered papers, suddenly very quiet. Someone in the back whispered, "Wow." Ethan sat down slowly. I took his hand. He squeezed once. Outside, reporters rushed toward us. I shielded Ethan with my body, guiding him through the noise. His breathing was fast again, but his eyes were clear. "You did it," I said softly. He shook his head. "We did." Richard passed us in the hallway. He looked older, smaller. For the first time, he looked directly at Ethan. "This isn't how it was supposed to go," he muttered. Ethan didn't respond. We stepped outside into the sunlight. The air was cool. The courthouse doors shut behind us with a heavy final sound. For 12 years, I'd carried the weight of being abandoned. That day I set it down. The drive home from Waterloo was quiet, but not the kind that tightens your shoulders. It was the kind that settles around you, gentle as dusk. The radio played low, an old country song with a soft steel guitar. The road stretched ahead, flat and familiar, cornfields on both sides still brown from winter. Ethan stared out the window, his shoulders finally relaxed. "You hungry?" I asked. "Yes," he said. Then after a beat, "Can we get the usual?" The usual meant the little diner off Highway 20, the one with cracked vinyl booths and the waitress who always brought Ethan his burger plain, no questions asked. We pulled in without another word. Inside, nothing had changed. The bell over the door jingled. Coffee poured. Someone complained about gas prices. Life went on, untouched by courtrooms or million-dollar paintings. Ethan slid into the booth across from me. He took off his sweater, folded it carefully, and set it beside him. His hands rested flat on the table. "You did really well today," I said. He nodded once. "It was loud," he said. Then, "But it was fair." That word stayed with me. Fair, not revenge, not victory. Fair. When we got home, the house looked the same as always. Peeling paint on the porch railing. The porch light flickering like it needed a new bulb. Inside, the familiar smells, old wood, coffee grounds, a hint of paint thinner from Ethan's workspace in the spare room. He went straight there. The canvas was already set up, waiting. He stood in front of it for a long moment, breathing, fingers tapping lightly in that steady rhythm of his. Then he picked up a brush. I watched from the doorway without him noticing. The first strokes were careful, measured. Then they loosened. The tension I'd seen in him for weeks slowly drained away, replaced by that deep focus I recognized as peace. I went back to the kitchen and turned on the coffee maker. The old thing rattled and complained, just like always. I smiled. For years I thought strength meant standing tall and fighting back. Raising my voice, proving something to the world. But that wasn't the strength that brought us here. Strength, I learned, wasn't loud. Strength was staying when someone chose to walk away. Strength was choosing patience instead of letting bitterness take root. Strength was giving a quiet boy the space to grow into a man who knew exactly who he was. Later that evening, Ethan carried the canvas into the living room. It wasn't finished yet, but I didn't need it to be. I could already see what he was building. A courthouse hallway. Tall windows pouring in light. Two figures walking side by side. Not holding hands, not clinging to each other, but close enough to matter. "It's called After," he said. I swallowed hard. It's beautiful. He shrugged, but there was just the slightest hint of a smile. We didn't talk about Richard again. Not that night. Not much after that. He faded back into wherever he'd been all those years, and for the first time I didn't feel any pull to follow him there. The money stayed where it belonged, in a trust meant to protect, not to tempt. Life didn't suddenly turn perfect. Bills still arrived in the mail. The porch still needed fixing. I still worried sometimes more than I should. But the weight I'd carried for so long was gone. For years, I believed I'd raised Ethan on my own. Now I understand that wasn't true. We raised each other through silence, through struggle, through the long stretches of time when no one was paying attention. If you've ever had to stand your ground quietly, if you've ever been underestimated because you didn't shout, if you've ever carried something heavy longer than felt fair, I hope this story reminds you of something important. Patience can be powerful, and dignity is a kind of victory no one can take from you. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to share it, sit with it, or follow along for more like it. Stories where truth wins without cruelty, and justice arrives without noise. Thank you for listening.